Hello, welcome back to the channel guys, I'm EVM and this video is responding to a lot of comments over the last few months about these things, home charge points. I often do videos that answer questions that are always being asked at the time because clearly people want to know about them. Now in June of this year, 2022, the government brought in legislation for home charge points, which means by law they have to have certain smart functions and features and various things I'll tell you about in a minute. Otherwise you're not allowed to use them essentially. So it's new legislation to mean that they have to have certain functions and features. Now, if you're of the ilk that believes that the world's governments have pulled the wool over our eyes and we all don't live on a nice flat plane of land, then you may be worried about this. You may be thinking, well, hang on a minute, the government can turn this off remotely, or the utility companies, or somebody, the Illuminati can take control of my charge point, then you may be worried. It's the same as smart meters at home. I get people telling me all the time that it's not there for any purposes of saving energy. Smart meters are here to spy on us, to tell the utility companies and therefore the government that they can control us by knowing when we turn the TV on, by knowing when we turn a light switch on and in what room. They can even use the smart meter to tell when your wife's getting in the shower.
No, that's for members only.
So in that vein, I'm going to look at the legislation about these charge points and what they can and can't do and why ultimately it's come about, just to tell you that I think everything's fine, you can relax. Or can you? Now before I delve into these depths, I just want to tell you about the Illuminati that installed my charge point. They're called Smart Home Charge. I got them to install this before any sponsorship started. They've been a long time sponsor of the channel, so a big thank you to them for keeping this channel going. They've got a great website that tells you all about, well, pretty much anything really. They've got blogs about EV stuff, blogs about charging, public charging. They've got comparison for EV tariffs, they've got comparison for public charging. If you get something from them, because they sell cables as well, there's a referral code I will put in the description below, which means you get some money towards public charging using your electric juice card. That is a good thing at the moment, given the price of electricity. Should point out, I don't get anything for these referrals, it's all yours. So if you do get something from smarthomecharge.co.uk, use the link in the description below and enjoy some free money for charging. I should point out that Smart Home Charge are not in any way related to the Illuminati that are responsible for what I'm about to tell you. Probably, maybe, I don't know. Now, because I have such a brilliant memory, I'm not at all using my phone about the 4 main things that the legislation by law is bringing in to charge points. Before that though, if you install your own commando socket, and this is something I've asked quite a few people and they can't really give me an answer, does that count as a charger? Because as I said, you can get a commando socket and then just an adapter for an EV. So I guess that could bypass this legislation, but I'm not sure. Feel free to put in the comments if you know the answer to that. So what are the, as I said, 4 main things that they've brought in and why have they brought them in? Data and connectivity is the first thing. So before you could install essentially just a plug if you want, or a dumb charger and you plug it in and it just starts charging. Sometimes the car could dictate when that happens, but essentially it was just a plug like, well, one of these things that you have on your walls. So this essentially means that all new charge points must have data connection now, with the ability to measure, record and transmit usage in minutes and as units of energy, and delay charging or slow it down during periods where grid demand is highest. This needs to be able to send data to the cloud, to whoever, maybe the Illuminati. So if there is a grid under demand, they can just do a little bit of tweaking and then the grid relaxes. Now that doesn't mean that they're going to turn everything off. That's not how the grid works. And for that, I think I'll need to explain on the whiteboard of truth. So the legislation is broke up into, as I said, 4 parts. The data connection is one of them. The next one is off-peak charging. We also have staggered charge times and additional security I'll mention later on. So let me concentrate on the delayed charge times or staggered charge times and the off-peak charging. So this is a very crude diagram or graph of the UK power grid usage during a typical day. 6 a.m, midday, 6 p.m. up to midnight, and this is total grid capacity. So 100%, basically, that's the most the grid can give us. And don't worry about the accuracy of this graph too much. I'm just trying to get a point across. So yeah, it might not be that accurate, but again, it's enough to say what I'm going to say. So let's concentrate on the off-peak charging first. Why would you want cars or electric cars to charge during the off-peak period? Why would that make any sense? And this also answers the question to people who says we need lots of power generation to power all these electric vehicles, because there's not really an understanding there on how the grid operates. If everybody charged their car here, then yes, we would need a lot more power generation. But that's the whole point of this legislation, to make smarter use of what we already have, rather than just be really inefficient and just pile more on, get lots more power generation. So let me just walk you through this. This is how much energy the power grid is demanding or providing at any one time. So during the night, as you can see, it's very low. People are asleep. Industry is, for the most part, shut down. Then you've got a bit of a peak in the morning. You've got more usage during the day, again, because people are at work. And then you get a big spike in the evening when people are going home, cooking tea, all that sort of stuff. And then it drops back down again because people end up going back to bed at some point. Again, don't worry about the accuracy of it too much. Again, it's just here to highlight a point. So this whole power generation, this 100% maximum power generation that we have, is just for this peak. That's all we need it for. It's just because when people go home, they need to use a lot more electricity. So the rest of the day, this is just unused capacity. If we had a big spike here, it wouldn't change how many power stations we needed, because you're still not going above the 100%. So let's make all chargers by default use off-peak charging. And that's what this legislation means, that when you get out of the box, essentially, it will by default charge at off-peak times, because there's lots of capacity at those periods. It will not mean we need any more power stations. As I said, if we did charge there, then that would mean that this spike would go up here. And then we would need more power stations. The Daily Mail is correct. We would need more than we have now. But that, again, is very inefficient. What we want is to make use of all this space here, because then, again, the amount of power stations we have won't change. It just means that they'll be on more often during the day. There's also off-peak tariffs. I'm on one. I have been for many, many years. And that means that I charge my car, and it's roughly about this period here. And that's when there's a load of capacity and not much use. So I pay 7.5 pence per kilowatt hour as of today. So that's today's rates that anybody can get. I don't charge here, I don't charge here, I don't charge here or there, because it would be 38 or 38.5 pence per kilowatt hour. So I naturally choose this period because it's cheaper for me. I save money. And that's what people will do. They will naturally choose what saves them a ton of money. That's how an electric car for me is, I would say, roughly 10% of the cost in terms of fuel than petrol or diesel. So by default, the chargers will do this, even if you're not on a time of day tariff, because the grid prefers it, even if your wallet will not be affected by it. Even if I plug my car in here, smack bang in the peak, it won't start charging until here. So it's all automated. Now, let me be very clear on this one. All the settings I've just told you, and I'm going to tell you for the rest of this video, you can override these. You can change them, you can turn them off, you can do what you want to do. This will not mean that you come out to work on the morning and think, oh, hang on a minute, why isn't it charged? All this legislation is irrelevant if you want to do your own thing. It just means that for those that never fiddle with the settings, and there are a lot of people out there that will just get a charger and leave it as that, it will automatically pick the best times for them, because people naturally won't do that. So that's what off-peak charging is and why it's a good thing. So what about delayed charging? Why is delaying charging starting times a good thing? Why would I want that? There's something called inertia in terms of power generation. I'm not going to go into it too much because most people couldn't care less, quite frankly. But the best example of this is, remember the stories that used to happen all the time, not so much now, that When we only had 3 or 4 channels on TV, yes, I do remember those days, long before the internet and Channel 5, even before Channel 4, when millions of people would watch Coronation Street or Emmerdale, and then the grid would know when the adverts were on because there would be a peak, because people would be turning the kettle on during the breaks. The biggest example is during something like a World Cup match. During half-time, there will be a significant peak because, again, right, it's half-time, let's go get a cup of tea or coffee or whatever, kettles would go on and demand would suddenly skyrocket. A grid would want a gradual increase. It doesn't want demand to suddenly go boom. And this is something that they figured out during the Electric Nation trials. If everybody was charging, let's imagine they're on Octopus Go, which I think is 12:30 to 4:30 in the morning. So it's a good time. But if everybody had that tariff, if everybody told their charger to charge between 12:30 and 4:30, that means all of a sudden lots and lots of cars would turn on at 12:30 in terms of charging. And then the grid would go from this to a sudden massive quick spike before it does that. And then it goes back down again. We don't want a massive sudden spike. What we want is just a gentle curve. Because that's a terrible drawing. Woo! I'm such a child. What we want is, again, cars to come on bit by bit. So part of this legislation of the delayed charging means that they can delay the charging by, if they really need to, by up to half an hour, but usually about 10 minutes. So rather than have a million cars come on at midnight, you'd have some come on at 12:30, some come on at 12:31, some come on at 12:32. It would randomise the charge time. So we won't get a big massive peak, we will just get a more gradual curve over the period of 5 or 10 minutes rather than instantly on. Once off-peak charging becomes more and more common, and of course it will do because they're putting all the chargers to do that, and people will naturally pick the cheapest time for them to charge, then again we've got to manage this a bit. But how can you manage something that's controlled by people themselves? I doubt many people will go, you know what, to help the grid out, I'll start mine charging at 12:33 or 12:37. They'll just pick 12:30 because why not? Especially as most chargers will work on half-hour blocks. By giving them just a little bit of control, which you can override, that means that the grid won't suffer as much. It won't go, oh crap, for a few minutes before then it catches up with itself. That's how you get little kind of brownouts or blackouts, when there's a sudden demand that it hasn't quite met, it hasn't ramped it up. It's like going to the toilet in the middle of the night and you turn the light on. It's like, too bright, too bright. If that light could just come on really gently and just get a bit brighter, that'd be perfect. And that's essentially what this does. That's what this legislation, again, by default, can do. You can turn it off, you can override it. If you want to charge during the peak times, you can do. You know, if you're on a weird shift pattern or you just need a bit of extra right now for whatever reason, you can do that. It's not stopping anything. What you do is kind of irrelevant in some ways to the grid. Even if you turned everything on in your house, the grid won't notice. But when you've got 1 million or 5 million people just using an extra kilowatt right now, then the grid will notice. So making tiny little changes for everybody has a massive effect on the power grid, on the UK as a whole. It'd be like everybody turning off their phone chargers. They only use like 0.1 watt or something, but if there are 1 million chargers plugged in, it can have a cumulative effect. Badly drawn diagram aside, I think that hopefully shows why this is not a bad thing. It's not scary. But there's one more thing that I still need to tell you about. The final part to this is that all data between the charge point and the people has to be encrypted. That's another part of legislation. The data, the transmission of data has to be encrypted. Again, that seems a sensible option to me and something I'm not really bothered about. So there we have it. That's essentially what this charge legislation brings into play, and I personally have no real issues with this. I don't believe the Illuminati are going to use it to control us. They're not, like, as a lot of the Daily Mail commentators will say, going to turn us all off when we're charging our vehicles. They may do little tweaks here and there, which makes sense from a grid scale point of view. It is a good idea ultimately from the trials that the Electric Nation taught them whilst doing chargers. It's just common sense, which is kind of worrying really. The government have done something that makes sense. That for me is the most worrying part of this whole thing. How can it be so logical for this when they do all the other stuff? I mean, EVs are something that the government are pushing very much. And I'm not getting political on this one. It doesn't matter who's in charge. They're all just as bad as one another. But essentially, we want to push EVs. They're the future. And to do that, we're going to remove grants from chargers, grants from EVs, so the poorest people in the country can no longer afford them by an even greater margin now, because the grant means that they've all gone up in price. There are ways and means to do these sort of things, of course, for me. Means-tested grants, like Scotland do. 0% finance for any electric vehicle, new or used, up to a certain amount. It kind of makes sense. But no, here we are. We live in a world that is dominated by idiots. And on that subject, I want to say thank you for watching this channel. Thank you for keeping me alive and, you know, the Illuminati in power. They're coming after me. Only kidding. I'm not a member of the Illuminati. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you soon.